Hey everyone, I know you guys are watching this content to accompany your sleep. So before we start, I want to know where you guys are watching from and what time you guys are watching. We really need your support to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's get straight to the story. The streets of Paris were quiet under the glow of dim streetlights, the Seine reflecting the occasional flicker of passing cars. It was the kind of night where the city seemed at peace, but beneath the surface, something sinister had begun to unfold. Aurélien Moreau, a well-known art dealer, had disappeared without a trace. His gallery, tucked away in the heart of Montmartre, was locked tight, its windows darkened. He had been seen 2 nights prior at a prestigious auction, bidding on a rare 18th century painting. That was the last public sighting of him. His absence had not gone unnoticed. His assistant, a meticulous woman named Isabelle Fontaine, had reported him missing when he failed to attend a scheduled meeting with a wealthy collector. When the authorities arrived at his penthouse, they found his belongings intact. Nothing suggested he had left voluntarily. His passport remained in its drawer, his car in its designated space, and an unfinished glass of wine sat on his desk. A deeper search revealed something more disturbing. Inside his office safe, untouched by force, was a single object that shouldn't have been there, a blood-stained white glove. There was no sign of struggle, no fingerprints other than his own. The only clue lay in a cryptic note scrawled in his handwriting, found beside his desk. The past never forgets. As news of his disappearance spread, whispers circulated in the art world. Some believed he had staged his own vanishing, others suspected foul play. But those who knew Aurélien understood that his past held secrets that, if uncovered, could shatter the illusion of his carefully curated life. The investigation had begun, and in the heart of Paris, a dark mystery loomed over the city. Detective Jules Lambert had seen many disappearances in his years with the Paris police, but something about Aurélien Moreau's case unsettled him. The calculated precision of it all, the eerie absence of any true evidence, and the cryptic message left behind. It spoke of something deeper than a simple crime of opportunity. It spoke of intent. Lambert began his search at Moreau's gallery. The establishment, a lavish yet intimate space, exuded an air of exclusivity. Priceless works of art adorned its walls, each piece telling a story of history, passion, and perhaps deception. The security footage from the past few nights revealed nothing unusual, except for the fact that Moreau himself had returned well past midnight on the evening of his disappearance. He had entered alone, his expression unreadable, but had never left according to the cameras. The detective's next stop was Moreau's penthouse. Though investigators had already scoured the place, Lambert believed in fresh eyes. The unfinished glass of wine sat eerily still on the desk, as if frozen in time. The blood-stained glove in the safe suggested violence, yet no traces of a struggle had been found. What disturbed Lambert the most, however, was Moreau's note. The past never forgets. What past? And whose? Lambert ordered a deep dive into Moreau's records. His connections, his deals, his rivals. The art world was a ruthless place, where fortunes were made and destroyed overnight, where authenticity was currency and deception an art form. He needed to know if Moreau had enemies, ones who had waited patiently for their moment. Meanwhile, in a dimly lit apartment on the outskirts of Paris, a woman sat hunched over an old journal, flipping through its brittle pages. Her fingers trembled as she traced the faded ink, her lips pressing into a thin line. She whispered Moreau's name under her breath, her voice barely audible. She had waited long enough. The sun rose over the city, casting long shadows across Montmartre's narrow streets. Detective Lambert sat in his office, staring at a board covered in pinned photographs, red string connecting names and locations like a spider's web. The case was evolving, and every new piece of information deepened the mystery rather than clarifying it. Isabelle Fontaine was the first to be questioned again. She had worked closely with Moreau, handling delicate transactions and dealing with elite clients. She claimed she knew nothing of his past secrets, but Lambert sensed hesitation in her voice. He decided to have her followed discreetly, assigning an officer to watch her every move. Meanwhile, forensic analysis on the blood-stained glove returned with an unexpected result. It wasn't Moreau's blood. The lab couldn't identify it in any database. The revelation sent chills down Lambert's spine. Who else had been involved in this crime? Elsewhere in Paris, a figure in a dark coat sat outside Moreau's gallery watching. He had been there for hours, his eyes never straying far from the locked doors. He was patient, unmoving, a silent witness to something only he understood. When he finally stood and walked away, he left no trace, except for a small envelope slipped beneath the gallery door. Inside, a single photograph lay folded. It was an old picture, yellowed with time. Aurelian Moreau stood in the center, flanked by two other men, their faces partially obscured by the wear of age. On the back of the photograph, in a rough, hurried script, for words had been scrawled. "You should have listened." Lambert knew this was no longer just a missing persons case. This was a reckoning. Detective Lambert traced his fingers over the photograph, his mind racing. Who were the two men standing beside Moreau? If they were connected to his past, then their identities might hold the key to unlocking the mystery of his disappearance. Lambert instructed his team to run the photograph through their database, hoping facial recognition would yield results. Meanwhile, he paid another visit to Isabelle Fontaine. This time, her demeanor was different, her usual poised elegance replaced with unease. As Lambert pressed her, she finally revealed something unexpected. Moreau had been receiving anonymous letters for weeks before his disappearance. Each one contained a single phrase, written in the same hurried script as the note in the photograph. "You should have listened." Lambert left her office with a sense of urgency. If Moreau had been warned, why hadn't he acted? And more importantly, who had been trying to reach him? That evening, another chilling discovery was made. The forensic team, searching the gallery once more, found a hidden compartment in Moreau's office. Inside, an old leather-bound notebook rested beneath layers of dust. Its pages contained sketches of familiar paintings, annotated with cryptic messages about their origins. One phrase stood out among the rest. "Stolen from the dead." Moreau's disappearance was no longer just about him. It was about something much bigger, an art conspiracy buried in history, and a secret that refused to remain hidden. And somewhere in Paris, someone was watching Lambert's every move. The facial recognition software had yielded results. One of the men in the old photograph was identified as Victor Langlois, a disgraced art curator with ties to an underground smuggling ring. The second man remained a mystery, his identity lost to time. Lambert knew he was getting closer to the truth, but he also knew that the closer he got, the more dangerous the game became. As he pieced together Moreau's history, a new revelation came to light. Moreau had been in possession of a stolen painting, a masterpiece thought to have been lost during World War II. And now someone wanted it back, at any cost. The deeper Lambert dug, the more entangled he became in a web of deception that stretched far beyond Moreau's disappearance. The stolen painting, the cryptic messages, the photograph, each clue led to more questions, more uncertainty. The breakthrough came when a historian at the Louvre contacted Lambert with disturbing news. The painting Moreau had possessed was not just any lost artifact. It was rumored to have belonged to a collection smuggled by the Nazis during World War II. If true, it meant Moreau had been dealing in stolen artwork tied to war crimes. But why had he kept it? And who else had known? At the same time, Isabelle Fontaine vanished. Her apartment was found ransacked, her phone abandoned on the kitchen counter. The last text she had sent, now unreadable, had been erased remotely. Lambert knew then that whoever had taken Moreau wasn't finished. As he reviewed the evidence late into the night, a knock came at his door. A courier, face hidden beneath a hood, handed him a small package before disappearing into the darkness. Inside, wrapped in aged parchment, lay another photograph. It showed Moreau, this time alone, bound to a chair. And beneath it, a single chilling line. "He talked too much. Will you?" Detective Lambert spent the night analyzing the photograph that had been delivered to him. Moreau's face, frozen in fear, haunted his thoughts. The message beneath it, "He talked too much. Will you?" was no idle threat. It was a warning. He took the photograph to a forensic analyst at dawn. The paper was old, its edges worn, but under ultraviolet light, something unexpected emerged, an invisible ink cipher, hidden beneath the printed image. The analyst carefully revealed a set of numbers scrawled in an unfamiliar pattern. Coordinates, perhaps? A bank account? A code for something buried in Moreau's past? Before he could investigate further, news arrived that shook him. A break-in had occurred at the Louvre, and a valuable painting, one tied to Moreau's last known dealings, had been stolen. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Someone was tying up loose ends. Lambert rushed to the museum, where he found chaos. Security was in disarray, and surveillance footage showed an unsettling scene. 3 masked individuals moving with precise efficiency, bypassing alarms with insider knowledge. They weren't ordinary thieves. They were professionals. As Lambert scoured the crime scene, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated before answering. A voice, distorted and cold, whispered a single phrase. "You're running out of time." The call disconnected before he could respond. A deep sense of urgency settled over him. Moreau's disappearance was no longer just about stolen art or missing persons. It was about power, hidden alliances, and secrets buried so deep that someone was willing to kill for them. Lambert knew he was getting close to something dangerous, and someone knew he was watching. The stolen painting had once belonged to a French noble family, its history steeped in controversy. Its original owner had been accused of forging Renaissance masterpieces before mysteriously vanishing in the late 19th century. Now, over a century later, the painting had disappeared once more. Detective Lambert couldn't shake the feeling that Moreau's disappearance and the heist were inextricably linked. As Lambert pieced together the painting's provenance, he uncovered a pattern. Moreau had been brokering sales for pieces with questionable origins, moving them through a network of elite buyers who preferred discretion over legality. His name appeared in financial transactions connected to Swiss vaults and offshore accounts, all tied to artworks with murky pasts. The stolen Louvre painting had been his latest, and perhaps his last, deal. That evening, as Lambert prepared to leave his office, he noticed something strange. His car, parked beneath a streetlight, had a shadow standing beside it, a tall figure, unmoving. The moment Lambert stepped outside, the figure turned and disappeared into the alley. He gave chase, weaving through the darkened streets, but his pursuer was fast. Too fast. He lost them near a secluded cafe. A newspaper, damp from the rain, lay crumpled on the cobblestones. Someone had circled an article in red ink, an obituary. The name, Jean-Luc Deveau, a former forger and art historian, dead from an apparent overdose 2 nights ago. Back at his apartment, Lambert scanned through old case files. Deveau had been suspected of laundering stolen art decades earlier, but had avoided conviction. Could his sudden death be connected to Moreau? The timing was uncanny. A knock at the door startled him. He reached for his weapon before opening it cautiously. No one was there, but on the ground, a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, a flash drive. Lambert inserted it into his laptop. A single file appeared, a video, grainy and distorted. It showed a dimly lit room, an ornate wooden chair at its center. Seated there, bound and gagged, was Aurélien Moreau. His eyes darted wildly, fear twisting his features. A voice, distorted and mechanical, spoke from the speakers. "You're looking in the wrong places, detective. Stop now, or he won't be the last." The video ended abruptly. Lambert clenched his fists, rage burning in his chest. Moreau was alive, but for how much longer? And how deep did this conspiracy go? Lambert sat in his darkened apartment, staring at the frozen frame of Moreau's terrified face on his laptop screen. His mind raced, dissecting every element of the video. The chair, the dim lighting, the faint outline of a painting on the wall behind Moreau. It was partially obscured, but Lambert could make out enough. A Baroque-style portrait, heavily gilded frame. He had seen it before. He scoured his notes until he found it. The painting had once hung in a private collection in Madrid, but had disappeared decades ago under mysterious circumstances. It had never surfaced on the black market. If it was now in the room where Moreau was held, someone powerful was hoarding stolen masterpieces in the shadows. He needed help from someone who knew the art underworld better than anyone, the kind of person who didn't officially exist. A call to an old informant led him to the Whispering Gallery, a secretive underground auction house rumored to operate beneath the streets of London. It was a place where the elite came to bid on priceless stolen art, artifacts, and even information. Lambert arrived in London under the cover of darkness, slipping through the side entrance of a nondescript historical building. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating with wealth and secrecy. Crystal chandeliers flickered above as masked guests sipped champagne, their whispers blending with the low hum of conversation. At the center of the room, an elevated platform displayed the evening's illicit offerings. Among them was a small, unmarked wooden box. The auctioneer introduced it as the lost ledger of Deveau. Lambert's pulse quickened. Deveau, the dead forger whose obituary had been circled in the newspaper. If this ledger contained records of his dealings, it could hold the key to finding Moreau. He wasn't the only one interested. A figure in the crowd, masked and motionless, raised a gloved hand to place a bid. Another followed. The price climbed rapidly. Whoever was after this ledger wasn't just wealthy, they were desperate. Lambert had no choice. He had brought enough cash to make a bid of his own, but he wasn't sure he'd win. Before he could act, a loud crash shattered the tension. Smoke erupted from hidden vents, filling the room in an instant. A coordinated attack. Someone had come to take the ledger by force. Gunshots rang out. Lambert ducked behind an overturned chair as masked figures stormed the auction floor. The wooden box was snatched from the pedestal in the chaos, disappearing into the shadows. He fought his way through the stampede of guests, chasing the thief down a narrow hallway. The intruder moved with precision, vaulting over obstacles as if they had mapped out the entire escape route. Lambert pursued them onto the rain-slick streets, his breath sharp in the cold air. Just as he reached for his weapon, the thief spun around. A woman. Sharp eyes beneath her mask locked onto his for the briefest moment before she vanished into the night, the ledger clutched tightly in her hands. Back in his hotel room, Lambert was left with nothing but questions. Who was she? Why had she risked everything for DeVoe's records? And most importantly, how far was she willing to go to keep them out of his hands? Lambert had spent the night going through every possible connection in London, trying to track the woman who had taken the ledger. He had no name, no leads, only the intensity in her eyes before she vanished into the night. Whoever she was, she had planned her escape with precision, leaving behind nothing but questions. The next morning, he found himself in a dimly lit cafe in Soho, meeting with an old associate, Graham Foster, a retired art smuggler turned confidential informant. Foster had his ear to the ground on anything that moved in the black market art world, and Lambert needed to know where the ledger might have surfaced. Foster took a sip of his espresso before sighing. "The ledger is dangerous," he muttered. DeVoe kept records on everything, buyers, sellers, corrupt officials. If someone has it, they're either looking to disappear or make a move. Lambert pushed a photo across the table, a hastily enhanced image of the masked woman from a street security camera. "Ever seen her?" Foster's eyes darkened. "I might have. If it's who I think it is, you're already in deep trouble." The name he gave was one that sent a chill down Lambert's spine. Isabelle Laurent. A former art historian turned elusive thief, Laurent had made a name for herself by stealing high-profile pieces from under the noses of museums and private collectors. She was a ghost, moving through Europe's underground with unmatched skill. Lambert left the cafe with a fresh lead, but more uncertainty. If Laurent had the ledger, was she protecting someone, or planning to use it for leverage? He needed to find her before anyone else did. By nightfall, Lambert had followed a trail to an upscale gala in Mayfair, an event frequented by collectors and dealers who operated in both legal and illegal circles. He dressed for the occasion, slipping past security with ease. Chandeliers gleamed overhead, illuminating a ballroom filled with silk gowns, tailored suits, and the quiet tension of hidden agendas. Then he saw her. Isabelle Laurent stood near the bar, dressed in an elegant black gown, speaking in hushed tones with a man Lambert recognized, a Swiss banker with a history of laundering money for stolen art deals. She was selling something, or perhaps negotiating protection. Lambert moved closer, but before he could act, she turned slightly, as if sensing him. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment the crowd disappeared. There was no fear in her gaze, only recognition. Then she was gone. Lambert pushed through the guests, following her exit through a side corridor. He reached the stairwell, just in time to see her silhouette disappearing onto a rooftop terrace. By the time he stepped outside, she was already scaling down a fire escape with practiced ease. He gave chase through the cold London air, dodging pedestrians as she weaved through the streets with the same precision as before. He was fast, but she was faster. By the time he reached the next intersection, she had disappeared into the night. A single envelope had been left on the ground where she had vanished. Lambert picked it up and unfolded the letter inside. "Stop following me, or you won't like what happens next." A challenge or a warning. Lambert sat in his hotel room, staring at the note Isabelle Laurent had left behind. The paper was thick, expensive, with an embossed emblem barely visible under the dim light. He recognized the symbol. It belonged to an exclusive Swiss bank known for handling the wealth of those who preferred to remain in the shadows. If Laurent was involved with this bank, she wasn't just running. She was playing a game, and he had just been invited. Determined, Lambert booked the next flight to Zurich. The city was cold, blanketed in a layer of snow that made every step sound louder than it should. He knew he was being watched the moment he left the airport. Black sedans parked just a little too conveniently, men in overcoats who lingered near newspaper stands without reading. Someone didn't want him here. His first stop was the bank itself, a monolithic structure of glass and steel, untouched by time. He walked inside, his detective instincts on high alert. The woman at the front desk offered a professional but cold smile. "How may I assist you, sir?" Lambert slid a fabricated business card across the counter, one he had made specifically for situations like this. "I represent an anonymous investor with interests in rare and valuable assets. I believe an associate of mine, Isabelle Laurent, recently made inquiries here. I'd like to discuss a mutual opportunity." The woman's expression didn't change, but Lambert caught the slightest flicker in her gaze, recognition. "I'm afraid I don't know who that is," she said smoothly. "But if you'd like to schedule an appointment with one of our advisors—" "That won't be necessary," Lambert interrupted. He leaned in slightly. "I know she was here. And if she was, that means something big is happening. You don't want me looking into it the hard way." There was a pause. Then, with the grace of someone used to handling high-stakes clients, she nodded toward a side door. "Wait here. Someone will be with you shortly." Minutes later, a tall man in an immaculately tailored suit approached. "Mr. Lambert, was it?" His voice was polished, but there was an edge beneath it. "I understand you're looking for Ms. Laurent. I'd like to extend an invitation to discuss this matter further. Privately." Lambert didn't like the sound of that, but he had little choice. He followed the man through the corridors, noting the security cameras, the reinforced doors. They entered a sleek office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The man gestured for him to sit. "Ms. Laurent is a person of interest to many," he said carefully. "But I must warn you, Mr. Lambert, some doors, once opened, cannot be closed." Lambert's patience was thinning. "Where is she?" The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He slid a single photograph across the desk. It was grainy, taken from a security feed. Laurent was in it, standing in an underground parking garage, speaking with a man whose face was obscured. Behind them, half hidden in the shadows, was a crate with a familiar marking. The same insignia found on smuggled art shipments intercepted by Interpol. "If you really want to find her," the banker said, "I suggest you start in Vienna. But be careful, detective. Some people don't appreciate being hunted." Lambert took the photo and left without another word. The moment he stepped onto the street, the same black sedans he had spotted earlier roared to life. They weren't just watching him anymore. They were coming for him. Lambert barely had time to throw his suitcase into the back seat before the black sedans closed in. He jumped into his rental car, slamming the door as the tires screeched against the icy pavement. The men in pursuit didn't waste time. One of the vehicles accelerated sharply, ramming into the rear bumper. Lambert fought for control, weaving through Zurich's narrow streets, his eyes flicking between the rearview mirror and the looming obstacles ahead. He took a hard left, cutting through an alley too tight for his pursuers. The sound of crunching metal behind him told him at least one of them had miscalculated. But the second car was still with him, pressing harder, trying to force him into a mistake. Lambert spotted an intersection ahead, one leading to a pedestrian square. He slammed the brakes, fishtailed into a spin, and gunned the engine in reverse. The pursuing car shot past him, and before they could recover, Lambert took off in the opposite direction. He didn't stop until he reached the outskirts of the city, where he abandoned the damaged rental and caught the next train to Vienna. The Austrian capital welcomed him with a cold drizzle, the gray skies mirroring the uncertainty clouding his thoughts. Laurent had been seen here, but where? He had no contacts, no allies, only the grainy photograph from Zurich. It was enough. He started with the underground art scene. Vienna was a city of grandeur and culture, but beneath its polished exterior lay a world of illicit deals and whispered exchanges. Lambert's first stop was a well-known but discreet establishment, a hidden auction house that dealt in rare and often stolen antiquities. He knew the place was run by Victor Schaefer, a man with fingers in every black market deal from Prague to Madrid. Schaefer was as calculating as they came. The auction house was located beneath an unmarked building, accessible only to those with the right connections. Lambert bribed his way in, flashing just enough cash to suggest he was a buyer without raising suspicion. The underground chamber was filled with a mix of collectors, criminals, and middlemen. The air smelled of old wood and expensive perfume, the sound of murmured negotiations filling the dimly lit room. Lambert scanned the space carefully, his heart pounding when he finally saw her. Isabelle Laurent stood near a gilded mirror, engaged in a hushed conversation with an older man draped in a cashmere coat. Her posture was tense, her movements calculated. She wasn't here for pleasure, she was here for business. But what kind? Lambert moved closer, keeping to the shadows. He caught snippets of conversation, mentions of a package and safe transport. Then a name that froze him in place. DeVoe, the name of the man whose ledger had started this entire mess. Laurent handed the man something small, a slip of paper. The exchange was quick, but it was clear she was setting up a deal. And whatever it was connected to DeVoe's empire. Lambert didn't have time to react before Laurent's eyes flicked toward him. Their gazes locked, and for a moment she hesitated. Then, just like in London, she turned and disappeared. This time, Lambert wasn't letting her get away. He pushed through the crowd, following her out of the auction house and into the maze-like streets of Vienna's old district. She was fast, but he was ready. He cut through a side alley, predicting her path. As she rounded the corner, he stepped in front of her. Laurent stopped abruptly, her breath visible in the cold air. For the first time, she looked at him, not with disdain or amusement, but with something else. Resignation. Before either could move, a shot rang out. Lambert barely had time to react as a bullet shattered the brick beside them. Someone else was watching. Someone who didn't want this meeting to happen. Laurent grabbed his wrist, pulling him into the shadows as more shots followed. The hunter had become the hunted. The shots echoed through the narrow streets, ricocheting off the old stone buildings. Lambert's instincts took over. He pulled Laurent behind the nearest archway, pressing against the cold brick as another bullet zipped past, shattering a street lamp nearby. The assailant was a professional, silent, precise, and likely watching them through a scope from above. Laurent's breath was ragged. "We can't stay here," she whispered hoarsely, though Lambert already knew that. He scanned the rooftops, searching for the glint of a rifle. The assassin had the high ground, which meant Lambert and Laurent needed to move fast. He grabbed her hand and dashed down the alley, weaving between old iron gates and abandoned market stalls. More bullets followed, splintering wood and stone, but the shooter was moving, adjusting their position. That gave them seconds to escape. Lambert led them into a covered passageway, one of Vienna's many hidden corridors that connected the old district like a labyrinth. They emerged into a small courtyard, a fountain gurgling at its center. Lambert's mind raced. If the shooter was working for DeVoe, then the attack wasn't just a warning. It was an execution order. "Who else knows you're here?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the rooftops. Laurent wiped a streak of blood from her temple, a graze from flying debris. "No one." That was a lie. But now wasn't the time to argue. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them. Lambert spun, gun drawn, but it wasn't the assassin. A figure emerged from the shadows, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark tactical gear. He moved like a soldier, and his eyes were fixed on Laurent. "You need to come with me," the man said, his voice low and firm. Laurent stiffened. "No." Lambert could see the conflict in her eyes. Whoever this man was, she knew him. And that meant trouble. Before the man could react, Lambert struck first. He lunged, twisting the stranger's wrist and forcing the gun to the ground. The man countered with a sharp elbow to Lambert's ribs, but Lambert barely felt it. His adrenaline was too high. They grappled, slamming against the fountain's stone edge. The stranger was strong, but Lambert had the advantage of desperation. He forced the man's head under the water, holding him there just long enough to weaken his grip. Laurent stepped in, kicking the gun away before Lambert let the man go. He sputtered, gasping for air, but there was no time for questions. The assassin could be repositioning. They had to move. Lambert grabbed the man's ID from his jacket. It was military, French intelligence. "So that's who you're running from?" he asked, shoving the badge into his pocket. Laurent didn't answer. Instead, she took off into the night, forcing Lambert to follow. The chase wasn't over. It was just beginning. Laurent didn't slow down, weaving through Vienna's darkened streets with the urgency of someone being hunted. Lambert was close behind, his breath shallow as they darted through narrow alleyways. The assassin was still out there, but so was the man from French intelligence. Neither of them could afford to be caught. They reached a secluded courtyard, where the remnants of an old cafe stood silent. The air was thick with tension, the echoes of their hurried footsteps fading into the quiet. Lambert grabbed Laurent's wrist, forcing her to stop. "Enough running," he muttered, scanning her face. She was hiding something. She always was. "What was that back there? Who was he?" Laurent exhaled sharply, brushing damp strands of hair from her face. "He's part of a faction within DGSE, she finally admitted. "Not official, not sanctioned, but dangerous." Lambert frowned. "And they want you dead?" She hesitated. "Not dead, just out of the way." Before he could press further, a distant rumble caught his attention. A motorcycle, its engine muted but still audible. Someone was approaching. Laurent stiffened, recognizing the sound as well. A courier. They ducked behind an overturned table as the rider rolled into the courtyard. The figure was clad in all black, a helmet concealing their identity. Slung over their shoulder was a slim, hardened case, one Lambert recognized immediately. A document transfer case. Whatever was inside was valuable. Laurent tensed. "That's for me." The rider dismounted, glancing around before pulling out a phone. A message was typed quickly, then sent. A few seconds later, Laurent's phone buzzed. Lambert caught a glimpse of the screen. One word. Confirmed. The courier unfastened the case and set it down on the cobblestone, backing away before climbing onto the motorcycle. Without a word, they disappeared into the night. The exchange had been seamless, almost clinical. Whoever sent this had resources, precision. Laurent reached for the case, but Lambert grabbed her hand before she could open it. "Not here." She nodded, and they slipped back into the shadows, disappearing into the labyrinth of Vienna's old city. Minutes later, they were inside a dimly lit safe house, an abandoned tailor shop Laurent had clearly used before. She placed the case on the wooden table, unfastened the locks, and slowly lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of documents, some handwritten, others typed and sealed with official insignias. But what caught Lambert's eye was the photograph resting on top. It was Deveau, standing beside a high-ranking European diplomat. Laurent met Lambert's gaze. "This is bigger than we thought." Before he could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Their pursuers had found them. The sharp knock at the door sent a jolt through both Lambert and Laurent. They exchanged a quick glance before Laurent sprang into action, grabbing the case and shoving it into a hidden compartment beneath the wooden floorboards. Lambert reached for his gun, stepping back into the shadows as another knock, this time heavier, more insistent, echoed through the small tailor shop. A voice followed, muffled but firm. "French. We know you're in there. Open up." Lambert's mind raced. If they were DGSE operatives, they wouldn't waste time talking. This was different. Either a bluff or a setup. He glanced at Laurent, who nodded toward the back exit. They still had a chance to slip out, if they were fast. The door burst open before they could move. A team of 3 men in tactical gear flooded inside, their weapons raised. Lambert reacted on instinct, firing a shot into the first man's shoulder before diving behind the old counter. Splinters erupted from the wood as the second man returned fire. Laurent crouched low, retrieved a compact pistol from her ankle holster, and fired 2 quick shots, hitting the third operative in the leg. Chaos erupted in the confined space. The injured man groaned, clutching his wound as the others regrouped. Lambert took advantage of the brief pause, lunging at the nearest attacker and slamming him into a display case, sending shards of glass flying. Laurent took out the last standing operative with a precise shot to his hand, forcing him to drop his weapon. For a moment, silence. Laurent's breathing was ragged as she pulled the case back out from its hiding spot. "We need to move. Now." Lambert nodded. The safe house was compromised. They needed a new location, somewhere the DGSE wouldn't expect. He grabbed one of the unconscious men's radios and listened. Static crackled, then a voice cut through. "Target located. Orders?" A pause, then a chilling response. "Eliminate them." Lambert exhaled sharply. They weren't being taken in for questioning. This was a kill order. He grabbed Laurent's hand, pulling her toward the back exit. They sprinted into the night, the cold air biting at their skin. Behind them, more voices echoed through the alleyways. More operatives. More danger. Vienna was no longer safe. They needed to disappear. And fast. The bitter night air stung their faces as Lambert and Laurent ran through the labyrinthine alleyways of Vienna's old city. Behind them, the echoes of their pursuers' boots slammed against the cobblestones. The DGSE was closing in fast, and they had only moments to disappear. Lambert led the way, his instincts guiding him through the maze of back streets. Laurent was right on his heels, clutching the case tightly against her chest. She knew what was inside could change everything, but none of it would matter if they didn't make it out alive. A bullet whizzed past Lambert's ear, embedding itself in a nearby brick wall. He cursed under his breath and took a sharp turn down a narrow passage, nearly colliding with a stack of abandoned crates. Laurent stumbled but kept moving. They emerged onto a deserted street lined with shuttered storefronts. A tram rumbled past, its dim interior light revealing empty seats. For a split second, Lambert considered jumping aboard, but it was too exposed. Instead, he grabbed Laurent's arm and pulled her toward a rusted iron grate leading down into the sewers. Are you serious? Her eyes flashed. No choice, he muttered, already wrenching the grate open. With no time to argue, Laurent climbed in first, dropping into the darkness below. Lambert followed, pulling the grate shut just as another volley of bullets tore through the air above them. The sewers were cold and damp, the stench of stagnant water thick in the air. Laurent activated a small flashlight, its dim glow casting eerie shadows along the tunnel walls. They moved quickly, boots splashing through shallow puddles, the distant shouts of their hunters still echoing above them. This leads to the catacombs, Lambert said, his voice hushed. If we reach them, we're ghosts. Laurent nodded, gripping her gun tightly as they pressed forward. The tunnels twisted and turned, the walls narrowing as they delved deeper. Water dripped from unseen cracks, each drop echoing in the vast underground expanse. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a collapsed section of the sewer, where centuries-old stones formed a rough passageway. Laurent's breath caught. The air was different here, older, heavier. They had entered the catacombs. Stacks of human bones lined the walls, remnants of Vienna's buried dead. The oppressive silence was suffocating, the weight of history pressing down on them. Laurent fought back a shiver. This place was their salvation, but it felt like a tomb. Lambert stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. Footsteps. Not theirs. They weren't alone down here. A flicker of movement caught Laurent's eye, a shadow slipping between the skull-lined walls. Then another. Someone was waiting for them. A trap. The realization hit too late. A sharp crack rang out, and the darkness erupted in chaos. The gunshot reverberated through the catacombs, a deafening crack that sent dust cascading from the centuries-old stone walls. Lambert dove behind a stack of skulls, his breath sharp and controlled, while Laurent flattened herself against a shadowed alcove, gripping her pistol with white-knuckled intensity. More movement, silent figures shifting in the darkness, barely visible in the dim glow of Laurent's flashlight. They weren't government agents. Their movements were too precise, their patience too calculated. Mercenaries, professionals sent to eliminate them without leaving a trace. A second shot rang out, chipping the stone inches from Lambert's head. He exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the maze of tunnels. The catacombs stretched for miles beneath Vienna, a burial ground turned refuge for the desperate and the damned. If they didn't turn this terrain to their advantage, they were as good as dead. Laurent pointed to a tunnel branching left. No markings, no visible signs of collapse. It could lead anywhere or nowhere. With a nod, Lambert fired 2 quick shots down the main corridor to cover their movement, then darted after her. The passage narrowed, forcing them to move single file. The walls pressed in, skeletal remains protruding from the stone like grotesque sentinels. Behind them, their pursuers followed, footsteps eerily measured. No shouting, no wasted movements. These were ghosts in human form. Laurent's breath hitched as the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. The ceiling arched high above, carvings of forgotten saints etched into the limestone. In the center stood an ancient well, its depths lost in blackness. She flicked her flashlight downward, no water. Just a chasm leading deeper into the city's underworld. Lambert caught the glint of steel too late. A blade flashed through the dim light, slicing the air where his throat had been a second earlier. He twisted, catching a glimpse of a hooded figure before driving his elbow into the attacker's ribs. The mercenary staggered but recovered instantly, striking with terrifying precision. Laurent raised her pistol, but another figure emerged from the darkness, kicking the weapon from her hands. She retaliated with a sharp knee to the stomach, sending the attacker reeling. Lambert, meanwhile, grappled with his own opponent, their struggle brutal and silent. He drove the mercenary against the well's edge, their boots skidding on ancient stone. A final, desperate heave, and the figure plunged into the abyss, swallowed by the darkness below. The remaining assailant hesitated. Laurent didn't. She retrieved her knife and drove it into the mercenary's side, twisting sharply. A muffled groan, then silence. She exhaled heavily, stepping back as the body slumped to the ground. The echo of approaching footsteps shattered the moment. More were coming. Lambert grabbed Laurent's hand. No more running. No more hiding. It was time to fight their way out. The ancient catacombs trembled as another explosion rocked the tunnels, dust and debris cascading from the ceiling. Lambert and Laurent sprinted forward, their breath ragged, their bodies aching. The mercenaries were relentless, pursuing them with calculated precision, herding them deeper into the labyrinth. Laurent's fingers were slick with sweat as she gripped her flashlight, the dim beam cutting through the suffocating darkness. Shadows twisted and lunged at the edges of her vision, every turn revealing new corridors lined with grinning skulls. The eerie silence was punctuated only by distant, muffled voices, more hunters lurking in the depths. "We need to get out of here," Lambert murmured, his voice barely audible over the ringing in her ears. A rusted iron gate loomed ahead, half buried in debris. Lambert wasted no time, using his shoulder to shove it open. It groaned in protest before giving way, revealing an ancient ossuary. The walls were lined with meticulously stacked bones, arranged in macabre patterns by long-dead monks. At the far end, a wooden ladder stretched upward toward a faint sliver of light. "This could be our way out," Laurent whispered. But as they stepped forward, a shadow moved. A figure emerged from behind a pile of rubble, tall, draped in a dark tactical suit, face hidden behind a visor. A silenced pistol gleamed in their gloved hand. Behind them, two more figures materialized, weapons raised. Lambert didn't hesitate. He fired first, his shot striking the lead mercenary's shoulder. The man staggered but didn't fall. The return fire came instantly, bullets ricocheting off stone, shattering skulls, filling the chamber with bone dust. Laurent dove behind a crumbling pillar, heart pounding. She spotted an old gas lamp mounted on the wall, its rusted metal frame barely clinging to life. An idea formed, a desperate, reckless idea. With a quick motion, she grabbed a shard of broken bone and hurled it at the lamp. The impact shattered the glass, igniting the ancient, volatile gas within. Flames erupted, licking up the walls in a violent blaze, swallowing the ossuary in flickering orange light. The mercenaries hesitated. That was all the time they needed. Lambert grabbed Laurent's wrist, yanking her toward the ladder. She scrambled upward as the fire raged below, the heat scorching her skin. Lambert was right behind her. The moment they reached the top, they crashed through a rusted trapdoor and tumbled into a narrow cobblestone alley. The city was alive above them. Distant sirens wailed, the streets of Vienna blissfully unaware of the inferno raging beneath. Laurent turned back, watching as smoke curled from the broken trapdoor. The catacombs had become a tomb once more, swallowing their pursuers in fire and darkness. But there was no time to celebrate. The hunt wasn't over. Somewhere in the city, their enemies were still watching, still waiting. And they wouldn't stop until Lambert and Laurent were dead. Smoke billowed from the broken trapdoor, curling into the night air like a phantom's whisper. Lambert and Laurent didn't wait to watch the flames consume the underground. They sprinted down the dimly lit alley, weaving through discarded crates and abandoned bicycles. The city of Vienna loomed around them, its historic streets an intricate maze of cobblestones and secrets. They reached a quiet intersection, pausing for breath. The sirens were distant now, moving in the opposite direction, toward the catacombs. But their respite was brief. Laurent spotted movement on the rooftops, a shadow shifting against the moonlit sky. "They know we're out," she murmured, her fingers instinctively tightening around the grip of her pistol. Lambert wiped sweat from his brow, nodding. "We need to disappear." Slipping into the darkness, they navigated through side streets, their every step calculated. Vienna was a city of hidden corners, of silent watchers behind shuttered windows. They needed to find a place to regroup, to strategize their next move before the net closed around them. Laurent led them toward an old tram station near the Danube. The crowd was sparse at this hour, mostly late-night workers and the occasional student. She pulled up the hood of her jacket, blending in. Lambert did the same, keeping his head low. A man in a dark overcoat stood near the ticket machine, his gaze sweeping the station. A second figure, a woman in a leather jacket, leaned against a pillar, pretending to check her phone. Laurent recognized them immediately, watchers. She nudged Lambert and veered toward the opposite platform. They needed an escape route. Fast. The tram's arrival was a blessing. As the doors hissed open, they slipped inside, choosing seats near the back. The watchers didn't follow, but they didn't need to. They had seen them bored. "We won't make it far like this," Lambert muttered, scanning the interior for threats. Laurent's mind raced. They needed a new identity, a way to erase their digital footprints. And she knew exactly where to go. "There's someone in Budapest," she whispered. "An old contact. He specializes in ghosts." Lambert raised an eyebrow. "How reliable?" "He erased himself from Europol's system 10 years ago. If he could do that, he can do it for us." Lambert exhaled sharply. It was risky, but they had no choice. Their old lives were burning away with the catacombs. It was time to become shadows in the silent war that raged beneath Europe's polished facade. The tram rolled forward, carrying them toward an uncertain future. The city lights flickered past, each one a reminder. they were still being hunted, and the game was far from over. The train cut through the darkness like a steel serpent, carrying Lambert and Laurent toward the Hungarian border. The rhythmic hum of the tracks beneath them was the only sound as they huddled in their seats, their tension palpable. Vienna had been a battlefield, and now Budapest was their only chance to disappear. Laurent kept her eyes on the passengers, scanning for any unusual movement. A businessman in a gray suit glanced at them once before returning to his laptop. An elderly couple sat near the window, oblivious to the silent war being waged around them. But it was the man in the farthest corner, hood pulled low, fingers tapping an erratic rhythm on his knee, that unsettled her. "We need to get off before the border," she whispered to Lambert. He nodded. "If they know we're on this train, the Hungarian authorities will be waiting." A low chime announced the next station, Győr, a quiet Hungarian city halfway to Budapest. They had to move fast. As the train slowed, Laurent rose first, pulling her scarf higher around her face. Lambert followed a few seconds later, blending into the stream of passengers exiting onto the cold platform. They walked briskly, ignoring the station guards, slipping through the terminal toward the city streets. The air was crisp, carrying the distant scent of the Danube. They needed transport. Fast. A battered taxi idled near the curb, its driver half asleep behind the wheel. Laurent tapped on the window, startling him awake. "Budapest," she said, slipping a folded bill into his palm. The driver studied them for a moment before nodding. The ride was tense. Lambert checked their reflection in the side mirror, watching for trailing vehicles. Twice he spotted a black sedan keeping its distance, its headlights flicking off when they passed through shadowed streets. "They're tailing us," he murmured. Laurent exhaled sharply. "Then we don't go straight to the contact." She leaned forward, speaking rapidly to the driver in Hungarian. He nodded, taking a sudden sharp left, weaving through narrow streets before cutting into a dimly lit alleyway. He killed the engine, looking at them expectantly. Lambert counted out more bills and pressed them into the man's hand. "Forget us." They slipped into the darkness, moving quickly through back streets until they reached a rundown apartment building near the river. Laurent led the way, pressing a sequence of numbers into the rusted intercom. A long silence followed before the door buzzed open. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and electronics. The hallway was lined with surveillance monitors, cables snaking across the floor. At the far end, a man stood, his silhouette backlit by the glow of computer screens. "Still running, I see," Laurent said. The man turned, his sharp eyes glinting behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Laurent, I was wondering when you'd come knocking." Lambert stepped forward. "You're the ghost maker?" A slow smile spread across the hacker's face. "I am, and if you want to disappear, you've come to the right place." The game had entered its final phase. They weren't just running anymore. They were about to become ghosts. The streets of Vienna were quiet that evening, the winter air carrying the scent of damp cobblestones and distant chimney smoke. Anton Volkov, a Russian financier with deep ties to European banking elites, stepped out of his black sedan, his breath forming a thin mist in the cold. His presence in Austria was no secret. He was in the midst of brokering a deal worth billions, one that would shift the balance of economic power across the continent. As he made his way toward the Grand Rosenberg Hotel, a shadow moved in the periphery of the streetlights. A man in a dark coat adjusted his gloves, watching Anton's every move. The financier was unaware of the silent figure trailing him, nor did he notice the second observer perched on a rooftop across the street, scanning his every step through the scope of a high-powered rifle. Inside the hotel, Anton checked into the penthouse suite, as he always did when in Vienna. He had no reason to suspect that this trip would be any different from the others, no reason to fear that he was being hunted. At precisely 2:17 a.m., the security cameras in the hotel flickered for a brief second. The moment they came back online, Anton Volkov was gone. His personal belongings remained untouched, his passport still in the safe, his watch resting on the bedside table. The only sign of a disturbance was a single, wet footprint near the window, where the glass had been left ajar. By morning, the world was already waking up to the mystery. News agencies across Europe reported the inexplicable disappearance of one of the most powerful financiers of the modern age. Some speculated a kidnapping, others whispered of an assassination. Yet no ransom demand arrived. No body was found. Anton Volkov had simply vanished. The disappearance of Anton Volkov sent shockwaves through Europe's financial and political circles. Newspapers splashed his name across their front pages, speculating wildly. espionage, revenge, and orchestrated escape. But behind closed doors, powerful figures in Moscow, Berlin, and London whispered a different theory. Someone had removed him, and whoever did it was careful enough to leave no trace. Interpol launched an immediate investigation, with Vienna's law enforcement taking the lead. The Rosenberg Hotel, once a sanctuary for the elite, became a crime scene. Detectives combed through surveillance footage, searching for anomalies. They found one, an 11-second blackout in the security system, precisely when Volkov disappeared. Forensic teams scoured his suite. There was no sign of struggle, no fingerprints beyond those of hotel staff, and nothing missing except Anton himself. The only detail that stood out was the single wet footprint near the open window. It wasn't Anton's size. It belonged to someone else, someone who had entered and left without disturbing a single object. The mystery deepened when a private security firm hired by Volkov's business associates made their own discovery. Reviewing external security cameras from surrounding buildings, they found grainy footage of a figure walking away from the hotel at 2:20 a.m. The person was tall, dressed in black, and moved with an unsettling precision, disappearing into the fog of the Vienna streets. 2 days later, a call came in from a dockworker in Trieste, Italy. He reported an abandoned black Mercedes, its interior meticulously cleaned, left near the waterfront. A closer inspection revealed a single piece of evidence wedged beneath the driver's seat, a boarding pass for a private flight from Vienna to Marseille, France. The name on the ticket wasn't Anton Volkov's, but it was a known alias he had used before. The trail led to Marseille, a city notorious for its labyrinthine streets and underworld dealings. Investigators arrived swiftly, combing through airport records, but there was no sign of Volkov. What they did find was far more troubling. In a quiet alley near the harbor, a local fisherman reported seeing two men arguing near a private yacht at dawn. One of them fit Anton's description, though he seemed disoriented, clutching his side as if in pain. The other man was taller, masked, and wore gloves. Moments later, the taller man forced Anton onto the yacht, and within minutes, the vessel disappeared beyond the horizon. The yacht, registered under a shell company based in Cyprus, had no known ownership. Its last recorded destination was Tunis, Tunisia. Anton Volkov had vanished from Vienna without a sound, and now his shadow was slipping further away, across the Mediterranean, into the unknown. The revelation that Anton Volkov had been taken to the Mediterranean sparked a frenzy among intelligence agencies. If he had been kidnapped, who was behind it? If he had escaped, why had he left in such secrecy? The theory that he was a willing participant in his disappearance crumbled under new evidence. Satellite images confirmed that the yacht never arrived in Tunis. It had changed course hours after departure, slipping into the open sea without a trace. Interpol, MI6, and the FSB launched parallel investigations, each with their own motivations. Volkov wasn't just a wealthy financier. His offshore dealings, political connections, and access to classified economic data made him a dangerous man to lose. If he was dead, someone had orchestrated it flawlessly. If he was alive, he was either running from something or being held by someone with a very specific agenda. Vienna's forensic team finally found something unusual in Volkov's penthouse suite. A trace amount of chloroform on the silk drapes near the open window. This meant one thing: he had been drugged. Someone had entered without force, subdued him, and extracted him so cleanly that not even his security detail noticed. But why? The answer came unexpectedly from Moscow. A high-ranking official within Russia's financial oversight agency leaked a classified report detailing Volkov's secret transactions in Cyprus, Switzerland, and Luxembourg. Billions of euros had passed through his network, linked to arms deals, government contracts, and hidden investments in war-torn regions. If someone wanted him silenced, the list of suspects was endless: rival oligarchs, intelligence agencies, or even a government that feared what he knew. A new lead in Algiers. 2 weeks after Volkov's disappearance, a breakthrough came from an unexpected place: a small dock in Algiers, Algeria. A cargo ship, the Orpheus, arrived from an unregistered port in the Mediterranean. Port authorities flagged the ship for its unusual route, and during an inspection, they found something chilling in one of the empty storage containers: blood. A forensic team confirmed that the blood type matched Volkov's medical records. He had been there, injured, possibly struggling, but alive. More clues emerged. A discarded wristwatch, later identified as belonging to Volkov, was found in a dumpster near the docks. Surveillance footage from a nearby street showed a convoy of black SUVs leaving the port at night, their license plates removed. They drove south, disappearing into the desert roads beyond the city. Someone had gone to great lengths to keep him moving, and now he was deeper in the shadows than ever before. The assassin's mark. While authorities scrambled for leads, a lone investigator working for an unnamed client uncovered something the world had overlooked. In the grainy footage of the masked man who forced Volkov onto the yacht, a single, almost imperceptible tattoo could be seen on his wrist. A symbol linked to Les Phantoms, a covert assassination syndicate known for eliminating high-profile targets across Europe. The symbol, a coiled serpent, had been linked to at least 5 unsolved murders in the past decade. If Les Phantoms had taken Volkov, it meant one of two things. He was either already dead, or he was being held for something far worse. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the truth remained elusive. Anton Volkov had vanished from Vienna. He had resurfaced in Algiers. But where he was now, who held him and why was still a mystery, and time was running out. The convoy of black SUVs that left Algiers that night never appeared again on any official records. No highway cameras captured them, no toll booth logs registered their passage. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. But in reality, they had driven south, deeper into the Sahara, where no satellites could track their movement, where the dunes swallowed all traces of the road. By the time intelligence agencies pieced together the significance of the convoy, it was already too late. Anton Volkov was long gone. The shadow broker. In a dimly lit apartment in Paris, a former MI6 analyst, now operating in the gray world of private intelligence, sifted through encrypted messages on the dark web. A name kept appearing in connection to Volkov's disappearance. A name that had not been spoken aloud in years, the shadow broker. No one knew his real identity. Some believed he was an ex-KGB operative. Others whispered that he was a ghost, a construct of multiple intelligence agencies using a single alias to cover their tracks. But one thing was certain. When someone vanished without a trace, when powerful men were removed from the board without a body left behind, the shadow broker was often involved. Through a network of underground contacts, the analyst uncovered a message buried deep in a hidden forum used by mercenaries and smugglers. The message was short, almost cryptic. The wolf is in the cage. The storm moves south. To those who knew the language of espionage, the meaning was clear. Anton Volkov was alive, but he was being held somewhere far from civilization, and whoever had him wasn't finished with him yet. The desert prison. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away from the nearest city, Anton Volkov woke up in darkness. His head pounded, his mouth was dry, and every muscle in his body ached. He was lying on a thin mattress in a concrete room, the air thick with the scent of dust and sweat. A single, flickering bulb swung from the ceiling. The walls were bare, except for deep scratches along the surface, as if someone before him had desperately tried to claw their way out. A steel door, bolted shut, was the only exit. There were no windows, no sounds from outside, just silence. His memories were fragmented, the yacht, the chloroform, the feeling of being dragged. But he remembered one thing clearly, the masked man with the serpent tattoo. Whoever he was, he wasn't working alone. Volkov struggled to sit up. His ribs throbbed. Someone had beaten him, not enough to kill him, but enough to remind him he was powerless. Then, outside the door, footsteps. Heavy boots. At least 2 people. The lock turned, and the door groaned open. A figure stepped inside, face obscured by the harsh backlight. But Volkov recognized the stance, the aura of authority. This was not a common thug. This was someone powerful. The figure stepped closer, revealing a weathered face, deep scars across his cheek. A man Volkov had not seen in over a decade. The past had caught up to him. The betrayal. In Zurich, Switzerland, a high-ranking banker received an untraceable phone call. The voice on the other end was calm, almost bored, but the message it carried was devastating. The deal is off. The wolf has been captured. Adjust your assets accordingly. The banker's hand trembled as he ended the call. He knew what this meant. Billions of euros, hidden in offshore accounts, were now worthless. Every agreement made in secret, every promise tied to Volkov's empire, had just collapsed. The stock markets wouldn't feel it immediately. Not today. But soon the ripples would spread. Companies would fall. Governments would scramble. And those who had trusted Volkov to shield their wealth would find themselves exposed. But the banker knew something else, something far more terrifying. Volkov had been betrayed by someone close to him. This wasn't a random kidnapping. This wasn't a simple power struggle. Someone had orchestrated his downfall from within. And that meant only one thing. Anton Volkov was never meant to leave that desert alive. The desert stretched endlessly beyond the compound's crumbling walls, its golden sands hiding more secrets than any city. Anton Volkov sat on the cold floor of his cell, every breath labored, his mind racing. He had spent his life navigating the corridors of power, dealing with billionaires and warlords alike. Yet here he was, stripped of his wealth, his influence reduced to nothing, a prisoner of ghosts from his past. The man standing before him, the one with the scarred face, was no stranger. Oleg Petrov, a former Russian intelligence operative turned mercenary. Petrov had once worked for Volkov as his personal enforcer, handling delicate matters that required discretion. But that was years ago, before Volkov had cut ties and disappeared into the world of offshore finance. Petrov had vanished too, rumored to have been killed in a covert mission gone wrong. But now he stood here, very much alive. He crouched in front of Volkov, his sharp blue eyes scanning his prisoner like a predator studying its prey. The silence between them was suffocating. Volkov knew what this meant. He wasn't just being held. He was being judged. The question was, for what crime? The unfinished business. Outside the cell, the compound was a relic of a forgotten war. Built decades ago as a military outpost, it had been abandoned, only to be repurposed by those who thrived in lawlessness. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their faces covered, their weapons old but well maintained. The symbol of Les Phantoms, the assassin syndicate, was etched into the metal of their rifles. Volkov's hands curled into fists. If they had him, then someone had paid for it. Les Phantoms never worked for free. The truth in the sand. Hours passed before Petrov returned, this time accompanied by two men in suits, men who didn't belong in a place like this. They were the kind of men who operated in the shadows of world governments, the kind who never had official records. One of them held a tablet, pressing play on a video. The screen flickered, showing footage of an office, Volkov's Zurich headquarters. But the focus wasn't on him. It was on a woman, Elena Morozov, Volkov's most trusted confidant, his second in command, the woman who had overseen every major deal, every wire transfer, every coded message. And she had betrayed him. The footage showed her meeting with officials from multiple intelligence agencies, MI6, the CIA, and even the FSB. She had been playing both sides, feeding them enough information to keep Volkov's empire intact while ensuring she had an escape plan. And then, when the moment was right, she had sold him out completely. Volkov clenched his jaw. Petrov studied his reaction carefully. "Now you understand," the scarred man finally said, his voice gravelly from years of war. Volkov exhaled slowly. He had been so careful. He had built his empire on secrecy, ensuring no one could ever fully control him. But he had trusted Elena, and that had been his downfall. The escape plan. If he stayed here, he was dead. He had no doubts about that. But Volkov had never been the type to accept fate. He had one chance. The compound was well guarded, but it wasn't a fortress. It relied on fear and isolation, not high-tech security. The guards were disciplined, but they were still human, creatures of habit. And habits could be exploited. For 3 nights, he observed. The guard rotation shifted every 4 hours. There was a brief window, just a few minutes, where a blind spot existed near the eastern fence. That was his way out. Blood in the sand. On the 4th night, the moment arrived. Volkov feigned illness, collapsing near the door of his cell. When the guard entered to check, Volkov struck, swift, brutal, precise. He had learned long ago that survival belonged to those willing to act without hesitation. Taking the guard's weapon, he moved fast, keeping to the shadows. As he reached the fence, an alarm blared. They had noticed. Bullets kicked up sand around him as he ran. His lungs burned, his body screamed, but he pushed forward. The sound of engines roared behind him, pursuers and jeeps, headlights cutting through the darkness. A single option remained. He ran toward the cliff's edge, the drop steep, unforgiving. Behind him, Petrov emerged from the dust, rifle in hand. Their eyes met. For a second, Volkov saw something in them, regret, perhaps, or maybe just calculation. And then he jumped. The ghost that wouldn't die. The world went silent as he plunged into the darkness. The desert wind howled. The river below swallowed him whole. For a moment, there was only blackness. And then breath. A gasp. A burning in his lungs. He surfaced, the current dragging him away from the compound, away from the bullets, away from death. By the time the search teams arrived, there was no body to be found. Volkov had vanished. Again, the aftermath. Days later, in a hidden safe house in Istanbul, a phone rang. A woman answered, her voice steady. A single phrase was spoken before the call disconnected. The wolf is free. Somewhere in the world, Anton Volkov was alive. Betrayed. Hunted. But not finished. And for those who had come for him, Elena, the intelligence agencies, less phantoms, they had made one mistake. They had left a survivor. And Anton Volkov was coming for them.